Hello, my name is Alexa Ciucu and I'm a psychologist at Accept Association, the Romanian NGO that protects and defends LGBT rights as human rights. We will be talking today about combating verbal and physical aggression against LGBTQI plus persons, and we have a few objectives to touch upon. We will try to understand what homophobic and transphobic hate crimes are and how they differ from other kinds of aggression, because there are some differences in the impact they have on the mental health of the victims. So we will try to understand this mental health impact on victims, on witnesses, and on entire communities, because we will see that hate crimes and in general queerphobic violence creates like a ripple effect that affects not just one person but entire groups of people. We will also be discussing harm reduction strategies and safety planning for queer youth, and we will also learn how to support LGBTQI plus victims of hate crimes as youth workers and counselors. What can we do to address their needs and support them after they have been victims of an assault? And very, very important, last but not least, we will learn how to protect ourselves from vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue, which is something that can happen, some phenomena that can happen to any workers who attend, like first response workers, like psychologists, social workers, youth workers, people who are in touch with this raw side of the emotions, the trauma that is created by violence. So we have a little list of very interesting things to touch upon, and let's go. And let's start the discussion with the question: how likely are LGBTQI plus persons to face aggression? And sadly, the answer is not very, very nice. Basically, queer people face significantly higher victimization risk than cishet persons. So queer people are nearly 4 times more likely to experience violence than straight cisgender people do. And of all LGBTQI plus people, it's trans people that are at greater risk of violence. And usually it's trans women. And there's a very specific case that happens with trans women. They are usually murdered, sadly, by usually cisgender men, straight men who have initially been attracted to them, but upon discovering they are trans, they get into a rage because they feel their masculinity is questioned, so they react violently, and the result is disastrous for trans women. And among the cisgender queer people, lesbians usually tend to experience more harassment or workplace bullying, while gay men have a higher risk of physical assault. And in general, for queer people, the risk of being victimized is especially high when gender nonconformity is perceived as a threat to societal masculinity. So, like, trans women are a threat because they are attractive to cisgender men, and that puts their masculinity in question. Also, gay men are seen as a threat because they are perceived as engaging in something that's not that's effeminate and not in tune with the gender norms. And of course, very important point about risk of violence is that queer youth are more vulnerable than older LGBTQI plus adults, because, you know, they have less of a support system. They usually don't have any financial independence. They depend on their parents, and their parents might not be aware that they are queer, so they don't have this support from their parents in many cases. Less maturity, emotional and neurological maturity also means that they have less access to healthy coping skills. So as youth workers, I think you will be very well placed to help them, and they will need your help a lot. Let's talk a bit about what hate crimes are, because basically this is the official name for queerphobic, transphobic violence. It's called the hate crime, and the hate crime is a criminal act motivated partly or entirely by bias against a minority group. Which means that in the cases of hate crimes, victims are targeted for perceived group membership, not for personal grievances. What does it mean that? What does that mean? Like, in the case of a homophobic hate crime, the victim is chosen because they are gay men, let's say. So it doesn't matter that John is a gay man, or that Mark is a gay man, or Alex is a gay man. That doesn't matter who they are and what they do. It matters that they are gay, and they will be selected by the perpetrators for this reason. It's not something that they done. It's not that they were, aggressive towards the perpetrator or anything like this. It's just because they are perceived as belonging to certain sexual orientation or gender identity. And why do I say perceived? I say this because sometimes cishet people can be victims of hate crimes just because the perpetrators believe that they are LGBT, not because they actually are. So that's not what matters. It matters what's in the mind of the aggressor. Of course, I mentioned homophobic hate crimes here because we are talking about LGBTQI plus people, but hate crimes are or can be committed against any minority group. Common targets are racial, ethnic, religious, gender, and sexual minorities. And usually in many countries in Europe, at least, this motivation based on hate against the minority is an aggravating circumstance, which means that when hate crimes are prosecuted, this leads to harsher sentences for perpetrators. So like if you punch someone in the face because they are gay, you can get a harsher sentence than if you punch someone in your face because you got into a fight for personal reasons. There are several types of hate crimes. Physical aggression is one of them. Hitting, kicking, shoving, using weapons against a person, and of course it's very this is very serious. It may lead to disability, permanent disability. It may lead to death. Like I said, trans women have the highest risk of lethal violence, and this is the reason why we are celebrating Trans Day of Remembrance on the 24th of November, because unfortunately there are so many victims. There's also verbal aggression, threats, slurs, intimidation attempts, sexual violence, which can be in the form of corrective rape, targeting lesbian, bisexual, and asexual women or trans people. What does corrective rape mean? It means that someone, usually a cisgender straight man, will take it upon himself to rape a woman who has come out as lesbian or bisexual, or a trans person, including trans men, to turn them straight. It's very cruel thing to do, and with lots of negative impact on the victim. But there's also sexual aggression intended to dominate or to humiliate queer men, again perpetrated by straight men. But it's what it is, and it involves humiliating the gay man or bisexual man, putting him into an inferior, again an effeminate position, because in heteropatriarchy, being a woman or being womanly or feminine is always perceived as inferior, rather than is inferior compared to masculinity. Other type of hate crime can be vandalism, property destruction, which can take the form of attacks on NGO headquarters, or on bookstores stocking queer-themed books, or homes of queer people. Sometimes it's desecrating graves of LGBTQI plus persons. Most frequent types usually are the intimidation and physical assault, and LGBTQI plus persons, like I said, are amongst the most targeted groups against minorities. And sadly, the hate crimes do have an impact on mental health, and it's not a very nice one, as you can imagine. Usually, what can we notice is that hate crimes victims usually show similar symptoms of distress than victims of similar non-biased crimes, but in all cases, their distress is higher, like their symptoms are more intense. They experience more intrusive thoughts, more anxiety, more depression, more self-blame. They also have a higher risk of developing PTSD, about which we will discuss a bit later, and the process of emotional recovery for them is longer and more difficult. But it's not only victims who are impacted. Witnesses who belong to the same minority usually experience the same mental health symptoms, which means that, like, if you're a trans person and you are watching another trans person being beaten up, you will also be affected, even if you are not beaten up yourself. And also, what can happen is that media reports about hate crimes happening in an area can elevate fear and insecurity in the local minority communities. Like, it can be a queer person, and you maybe you have never been assaulted, you don't know anybody personally who has been assaulted, or you have never witnessed it, but you know there's a risk, you know there's always a risk, so that creates anxiety and mental health distress in you. Which means that hate crimes have a ripple effect. Like, they don't only affect the individual or the witnesses, but the entire community. It's like you throw a stone in a pond, and then the ripples, they just go everywhere, even in a huge lake. That creates for the entire community a sustained minority stress. And this is why hate crimes are an aggravating circumstance in many countries, because their effect is worse, like even on an individual or a group scale. So it's a very good thing that lawmakers are considering it, identifying it as an aggravating circumstance. Maybe you are asking yourself by now, why hate-motivated aggression hits harder? Why does it hurt more to be assaulted for being LGBT than it hurts for getting into a fight in a bus with someone? And this is because the attacks target the identity or the core traits of the victim's personality, and they send the message that these victims are unwelcome in their own community, in their own local community. Sometimes the acts of physical assault are also mixed up with verbal threats, slurs, like in one of the most famous cases in Romania, back in 2006, when some participants in the Bucharest Pride were beaten up in the Bucharest subway. Besides being physically assaulted, they were told, go out of the country, go back to the Netherlands. They were not from the Netherlands, but the Netherlands was perceived as an LGBT haven. So like a very direct message, go away, you're not welcome here. And on top of that, the victim's sense of safety and control over their own life is shattered. Like, they have been victimized for something that is not their fault. They have been targeted, selected, they haven't done anything. Maybe they have been targeted for how they look or for how they act. These are not things that can be changed. If it happened today, maybe it can happen tomorrow, maybe it can happen many times afterwards. So you cannot be certain, you cannot be safe. I mean, none of us is certain of their own safety and their lives. Absolutely not. But it's an illusion that we have. We think that we are safe, and we need this illusion in order to be able to live without worry our lives. And when something like this happens, then the sense of safety is shattered, and it's very hard to get back on track. And what has been noticed is that societal power dynamics and prior discrimination experiences do amplify the emotional impact of hate crimes. So like if you're a person of color or an LGBTQI person, you have been exposed all your life to all kinds of microaggressions that don't make the threshold for a hate crime. But they all have a cumulative effect, and they deplete the victim's coping resources. So when something really bad happens, as a victim, you have much less coping mechanisms to rely on. And that, of course, makes your recovery harder. As youth counselors, let's discuss some strategies to prevent hate crimes. And it's very important to be aware that there's no certain way to prevent hate crimes, because it's not what queer persons do. It's the responsibility of the aggressors absolutely entirely. So we cannot entirely prevent them, and it's better as youth workers, as counselors, it's better to not give people false hope about that. But there are strategies that young queer people can use to manage the risk, to lower it a bit, and we can definitely teach them those approaches. One of them is situational awareness. You can recommend young queer people to stay alert, to listen to music at a lower volume if they listen with headphones, or maybe not listen to music at all in more dangerous areas, and to notice the people around them, to be aware of who is around them, who's moving around them. There's also safety in numbers, Like you can recommend them to travel with friends, to share live location when they feel uneasy, meet new dates in public, especially like for trans women, like we discussed, but for many other people as well, because there have been cases of homophobic aggressors masquerading as gay men on gay dating apps, so they get to meet gay men for a date, but when the date happens, they actually assault their would-be date. So it's better to meet dates in public than in private places to protect against this. Also, avoiding high-risk areas at night, sticking to well-lit streets. Avoid known extremist hotspots, and if you know about an extremist rally that is going to happen, definitely you can alert your peers, and can be very valuable. I've seen this happening in the Bucharest community, and it really helps people avoid the manifestations of far-right extremists. Also, if we can also teach young queer people that it's better to not escalate provocation. If somebody starts provoking them, it's better if they avoid responding to these taunts and to focus on getting themselves to safety. And if they are followed or threatened, super important to call emergency services. In EU, the universal number in the European Union is 112, very easy to remember, and most phones also have it as an emergency option. Sometimes young queer people are very reluctant to call the emergency services. They are afraid that they won't be believed, that the police will be homophobic or transphobic to them, and it's really important to offer them information about what would happen if they call the emergency services, because no matter how homophobic or transphobic the authorities, the police they can be, it's still better, and they will still have to do their duty and intervene if there is an assault, and that's definitely a better option. So and in most cases it's the best thing to do. Also, we have talked about what to recommend, but there's also something very important not to recommend. Do not advise young queer people to present less queer in order to avoid being targeted, because such advice only serves to place the blame on the victim and reinforces internalized stigma. It's very ineffective as well, because the attackers target perceived queerness, not real queerness. They often do this inaccurately. If they perceive you as queer when you are cishet, you are at the same risk. So there's no point in wasting time with this strategy, but also for many queer people, changing their presentation is not possible. Like if you're an intersex person or a trans person who is in the middle of a transition and still looking androgynous, you can't do anything to change it. Or even if you can do something to change it, it might be emotionally damaging. Maybe you're a trans person who has not yet started medical transition, but has started social transition. Maybe this is how you act. You are a non-binary person who are more androgynous. That's who you are. Trying to modify this will be emotionally damaging for you. But some young people, of course, can choose to be straight passing as a strategy. If they do this of their own volition, and if it brings them comfort, it can be a valid strategy. It need not be shame. You can have understanding for this, but it's wise to explore its emotional costs and to see how much it costs the person to do this, and to help them find a way to balance authenticity and safety, and also encourage them to cultivate safe spaces, relationships where authenticity is possible. Like if they need to be very straight passing in most areas, public areas, maybe they have some circles of friends where they can be their own queer selves with those people, and we can encourage them to do this. Many young LGBTQI+ young people also experience anxiety about being assaulted, and what can you do to help them as youth workers? You can hold space for their emotions before reassuring, and validate fear as a normal response to an abnormal situation. It's a normal response to the abnormal situation of being victimized. That's a real risk. Each queer person is facing this. We don't need to sugarcoat this risk as youth workers. It's the sad reality, but it's the reality. And don't jump straight in to reassure people, because you might think, oh, this is exaggerating. These people don't really face this extreme risk they're saying they face, but how can we know? We can't know the circumstances of each people's life. So If fear seem exaggerated, you can use very careful reality testing with people. You can try to check how much of a risk there is, but make sure to avoid being dismissive, because what looks exaggerated to you might actually be a real risk for the person you don't know that. What can be helpful is to map resources, both inner and outer ones, like skills and self-care, or allies, friends, family, NGOs, teachers. Resources are not solutions to a problem, but they are things that can help us find a solution, or they can help us deal with the situation. You can also use grounding and relaxation techniques with young people who experience anxiety about being assaulted, and again, you can focus on what can they do to keep themselves safe. And of course, we want that young queer people avoid being assaulted, but we cannot always prevent that. So what to do after a queerphobic hate crime? What can we tell them to do? Like, it's good to discuss these things beforehand so that they know. You can, as youth workers, you can discuss these approaches before the hate crime happens. And you can recommend them to get to safety as soon as possible. That's the most important thing. And to seek medical care, even if the pain is not very strong. Because the adrenaline and the endorphins that are secreted by the body, released by the body during an attack, they can mask injury. Like, even in the case of car accidents, you might not feel the pain for a longer time. This can also happen during assaults. It's just how the body reacts. And head injuries especially really warrant prompt evaluation, because troublesome symptoms might initially be absent but show up later. So also it's a CT scan and the neuro evaluation is always very important. And if the victim decides to seek legal remedy for the hate crime, a medical certificate is a key piece of evidence. So it's good for them to go to the hospital, to the emergency services, to get this, in case they decide to seek legal remedy. And also, it's good to advise them to try to remember any signs that can help law enforcement to identify the attacker. You know, like the gender, the height, the clothing, the hairstyle, any potential birthmarks, tattoos, symbols connected to extremist or hate groups, and also any words or slurs that have been used, like homophobic, transphobic slurs, because all of this will be key evidence to establish the hate motivation for the authorities if they decide to report the incident to the police. If it's safe and possible during an attack, they can record audio videos, they can save messages, photos, and damage property images. If the victim cannot do it, but there are some witnesses, the witnesses can do this themselves, and it can help. It can be a key piece of evidence. Should hate crimes be reported? It's not mandatory, and I think it's important to respect the victim's decision, but it's also important to inform them that reporting hate crimes is the only way to access legal remedies for them. But unfortunately, the vast majority of hate crimes go underreported, usually because of distrust of authorities, fear of being outed or not being believed, prior negative experiences with law enforcement, or the reporting procedures might seem too complex and intimidating to people. Do not, under any circumstance, pressure victims to report the hate crimes. It's a decision. It's only theirs to take, because you cannot live with the consequences of this decision. They will have to live with this consequence, so they are the ones they need to take. And also remember that when a hate crime happens, the victim's sense of agency is diminished by having been subjected to somebody else's aggressive will. So you can help restore the sense of agency that has been shattered by the aggression by empowering them to make choices for themselves. However, do offer information about their rights, and if they want to, help them connect with queer-friendly legal support and can help them make this decision. What needs do the hate crime victims have? Well, there's a need for safety, a need for emotional support, a need to have key information about their rights and about available legal remedies, the need to be respected, confidentiality, a desire for justice, and a need for belonging, because like I said, the hate crime has transmitted to them this message that they do not belong in the community or in their country. So restoring this is important, and also witnesses of hate crime should also be afforded the same level of care as victims, because they also experience the same mental health symptoms that victims experience. That's important to not overlook them. And there have been cases like personally experienced in my practice, like cases where the victim themselves was not as affected by what happened to them, but the witness who was part of the same community and who saw this aggression was very, very disturbed by it. It can happen. It's a personal response. Like all kinds of assaults will induce a trauma response in people, but the intensity of this trauma response really depends on the victim's prior experiences, on their past life, their resiliency, their mechanism, their coping mechanisms. So we cannot predict how hard a certain aggression will be, how much of a trauma response a certain aggression will create. We do know that in the early stages after an aggression, most people experience some shock or denial that may look like a calm detachment. It's a normal crisis reaction. It does not mean that the person is not emotionally impacted, and strong emotions can surface later. So we should be on lookout for this. And like I said, not everybody who will be assaulted will experience lasting trauma. Not everybody will need a very long and arduous journey of recovery. Not all of them will go on to develop a trauma-related diagnosable disorder like ASD or PTSD. We don't fully know the reasons for this, but resiliency plays a key role. So if we encourage resiliency in general in queer youth, then we empower them, we equip them with better tools to face a potential trauma response. What can happen as a trauma response? We have ASD, the acute stress disorder, which involves significant distress happening at less than 1 month post-event, and we also have PTSD, which is the post-traumatic stress disorder, when the symptoms come up later than 1 month, or maybe even several months, or maybe even years. It can be delayed. They are very similar in symptoms, but usually ASD resolves within this 1 month. Like you can have very strong symptoms, but after 1 month they usually go away. While for PTSD, they continue for a long time. They can continue for years. Some PTSD hallmarks are intrusive thoughts, avoidance of reminders of the trauma, hyperarousal, like always being on high alert, negative mood and cognition changes, flashbacks of the events. This can be very disruptive. It's important that youth workers not attempt trauma work. This only should be done by a psychotherapist who is specialized in trauma. Not even all psychotherapists can do it. And if you as a youth worker suspect ASD or PTSD, the victim should be referred to a psychologist and a psychiatrist. But you can do some things. You should not attempt trauma work, but there are things you can do, and you can listen to the person's story with empathy and compassion. You can normalize all emotions they experience. It's okay for them to feel extremely sad, angry, upset over what happened, and no emotion is out of place, no matter how powerful or how strange these emotions seem to the person. You can help them identify what resources they can access to help them cope, and you can also help them identify whether the coping mechanisms they are using are healthy, and you can also suggest healthier alternatives for some mechanisms that are problematic, like alcohol or drug use. You can gently reassure them if they blame themselves for the assault. It's never their fault, never the fault of the victim, no matter what they did or they said or how they acted. The responsibility for the assault lies solely with the perpetrator, not with them. And it's important because some people, of course, they will blame themselves. Some people might be angry with themselves because they didn't react differently during the assault. Like sometimes people freeze and they can't do anything, and then it serves well to explain to them that there are 4 innate responses to perceived threats: the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses, and these automatically kick in when the brain believes that we are in life-threatening danger. They cannot override them easily, so it's important for them to not blame themselves. You can suggest grounding and self-soothing techniques for stress and anxiety, encourage self-care routines for them, and help them identify what things they can do, what resources they can access in order to rebuild a sense of safety in their lives. Because we have talked how hate crimes impact this sense of safety, and of course, it's important to watch out for signs of PTSD or reactive depression and refer them to a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist to get properly assessed and treated if you suspect something. And last but not least, this is our last point. And this is about vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. It's a hazard for counselors. It's not a hazard for the victims. So it's important to talk about us, the counselors, as well, because we are also humans. We are not robots. We meet the victim with a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion, but it also takes a toll on us. So this can take the shape of vicarious trauma, which is a phenomenon that happens when a person experiences emotional trauma symptoms without having been exposed to the actual traumatic event, but the story is shared by survivors. It's very common in first responders. It happens when there are catastrophes, disasters, when you are exposed all the time to people who have experienced huge trauma. Some signs that you can watch out for are lingering feelings of sadness, despair, or anger about the trauma experienced by your beneficiaries. Another sign is getting too involved emotionally with the issues experienced by the beneficiaries and having a hard time separating work from personal life and developing a bleak, hopeless outlook on life. It's like your brain acts like if you were the one who experienced trauma. And you can also experience a lot of compassion fatigue. This happens when counselors are emotionally overwhelmed by the amount of suffering they are exposed to, and their capacity for empathy and for feeling compassion is temporarily blunted. Like it's been too much, like the brain tries to downregulate compassion and empathy so it doesn't hurt you. It's not something that you can, it's not something that you can consciously change, but you can prevent vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. You can maintain a healthy work-life balance with plenty of time to rest and relax, engage in hobbies, interests you're passionate about, and the simple pleasures of life. Do not isolate yourself, keep in touch with friends and loved ones, make sure to spend time with them, ask for support when you are feeling down, engage in self-care practices and routines, employ grounding, journaling or meditation techniques when emotional need for them arises, seek supervision or support from colleagues when work gets too overwhelming, and of course consider psychological counseling or psychotherapy sessions if you feel the need for more support. And it's important to cultivate a gratefulness approach to life, count your blessings, so to speak. Make sure to acknowledge the good things that are happening to you or that you are making happen for other people, for your beneficiaries, no matter how small they seem at first. It's very, very easy to get wrapped up in negativity and despair when you are exposed to high levels of trauma and suffering in your work. Also, it's important to resist temptation to invalidate or diminish your contributions. Like, don't say, oh, it doesn't matter, what I'm doing doesn't matter. There's so much suffering around me that, just spending an hour with a client, with a beneficiary, doesn't make a difference. Like, resist this temptation because it's not true. Like, every little thing you do has a very strong impact on the people that you counsel. And while you cannot stop homophobic or transphobic violence from happening, and you cannot rescue queer people who are being assaulted every day in the world, and you cannot take away the trauma they struggle with after an attack, however, your willingness to be there for them when they suffer and to work alongside them on the journey to recovery makes a world of difference for many, many of them. Like, every moment you listen to their stories and hold space for their emotions matters. And I will close this presentation by mentioning a song by Pink Floyd's Roger Waters that goes something like this: like each small candle lights a corner of the night. And this is a very apt metaphor for the work counselors and youth workers do. We can't make all the darkness in the world go away, but we can help our beneficiaries light so many candles of hope and healing in their lives. And it matters. It's very important. Thank you for listening and attending our webinar, and I wish everybody a good day and a lot of success in your work.